Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are moving on to episode 5 of my Finding My Letterboxd 4 series.
4 favorite films of all time. Oh, damn.
Absolutely, I know Letterboxd. Are you gonna ask me for my 4?
You bet.
I always find this so hard to answer. And I'm not going to pick the cool ones.
There are no cool ones.
I mean, there are, but...
There are.
And if you're new to the channel or just to this series in general, I'm putting this video in a playlist with all of the rest of the videos in this series, but just a quick rundown of what this series is for the longest time I've kind of had the same Letterboxd 4. Now these 4 films, while I love each and every one of them, and there's a reason why I had them in my Letterboxd 4, I couldn't help but feel like over the last, couple months specifically, but over the last, year or so, that it feels like a very specific 4. Like it's 4 from pretty much the same year. I guess 3 from 2019, 1 from 2017. So it's all kind of the same ballpark. And I feel like my Letterboxd 4, for me, I just feel like there's probably films that I'm overlooking or things that I'm like haven't seen as recently that I'm just not giving them the shot that they will deserve to be in that Letterboxd 4. So that's the whole point of this series, is now that we've done the first 4 episodes of just covering each of those 4 films, with Get Out, Little Women, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and Parasite. So now we're just moving on to the next phase of this series, and it really is just kind of taking a look at some of the films that I give 5 out of 5. They're films that I've loved, but maybe I just haven't seen them recently enough to have given them that consideration of being in my Letterboxd 4. And I think part of the thing that you'll notice with those 4 specific films is they all fall in a very kind of similar pocket, I guess, of films. They're kind of what you might call like film Twitter picks. They're films that are all kind of in the same vein. These 3 of the 4 Best Picture nominees, and I think in a different timeline, it's very possible that Portrait of a Lady on Fire could have had the same kind of Oscar success as the other films. But yeah, again, they won multiple Oscars. They were nominated for Best Pictures. They're all kind of in the same. They're generally loved. They all have 4.2s plus probably on Letterboxd. Like they all are kind of all in the same pocket. And so I don't want this series to necessarily feel like it was just going to be me talking about all of these classic, films that we can all agree, we all understand are good films, and I'm not super special or anything for saying that I love them or that they're some of my favorite films. So I thought it would be fun in this series to also, just while I'm doing all of these 5 out of 5s, these films that I love, also talk about some of these films that maybe might surprise you that they're cracking into this series. And so with that being said, let's jump into the review of today's film, which is true crime writer Ellison Oswalt is in a slump. He hasn't had a bestseller in more than 10 years and is becoming increasingly desperate for a hit. So when he discovers the existence of a snuff film showing the deaths of a family, he vows to solve the mystery. He moves his own family into the victim's home and gets to work. However, when the old film footage and other clues hint at the presence of a supernatural force, Ellison learns that living in the house may be fatal. The film stars Ethan Hawke as Ellison Oswalt, Juliette Rylance as Tracy, Michael Hall Daddario as Trevor, Claire Foley as Ashley, and James Ransone as Deputy So-and-so. Sinister is a horror mystery released in 2012 and was directed by Scott Derrickson. The film is rated R for disturbing violent images and some terror. Now, obviously, film is just a very subjective thing from person to person, right? We can all watch the same film and we can all have different takeaways. Some people may love it, some people may hate it. That's kind of the beauty of this art form, of making movies and of just cinema in general, is just we all get so many different experiences from those. And so that's why I think the whole concept of asking someone what their Letterboxd 4 is, I think is such a fun idea, because there's so many films that you can point out and say, like, yes, I agree that this is a great film, and there's these films that we all kind of feel like we have to say, like, oh, that's a great film, obviously it's a classic, obviously it's this and this, so there's so many different films like that. But in order, what can crack your Letterboxd 4, not only do you have to watch it and view it as this is a good film, there also has to be kind of like a story. There has to be something that connects you, I think, to that film a little bit more so than just you watch it and just be like, oh, obviously everything's great. So obviously here with Sinister, this is one of those films that I'm sure if you've seen the film, there's very good chance that you don't love the film as much as me. I mean, obviously there's a chance you love it more, but I think there's a good chance that it's maybe not your favorite film, and it might kind of surprise you as you've seen the four that we've kind of covered in the series to then be moving on to Sinister. But Sinister is one of those films that I look on Letterboxd and I think there's, I give it a 5 out of 5, and then with all the mutuals I have, or just the people I follow on Letterboxd, I think there's her name's Caitlin. She's Scared on YouTube. I think she gave it like a 4.5. And then after her, I don't think anyone else that I follow has given Sinister more than like a 3.5. One of my good buddies that I watch a lot of movies with, and he's one of my buddies that we talk movies about. Talk about movies a lot with, he gave it I think a 3. So it's one of those that I can see this being a film that it's just not a lot of people may think it's good, or they may think it's like a fine horror movie, but they don't love it the same way I do. And so I think the important thing that we need to talk about here with this film in particular, and maybe some of these other films that, as we kind of keep going deeper into this series of they're not necessarily what you consider these classic amazing films, I think there is a bit of a story, kind of like a story time, that can go into why I love these films so much. So starting with Sinister, really the reason I love this film so much and the reason why it connects with me is I guess I would have been, I don't remember what grade. I was in high school when this came out, and I had a buddy that, he was supposed to be going on a date and he was going to go see this movie that night, and I happened to be in class with him when she called off the date or whatever. And so he just, turns to me and says, "Hey, you're coming to see a movie with me tonight." And I was like, "Okay, cool." Like, I think it was like a Friday night or something. It was like something fun to do on the weekend. And I remember asking him, "What's the movie called?" And he says Sinister. Now, mind you, this was back, again, like in high school, before I really got into movies. I wasn't really going to the theater a whole ton. I wasn't seeing a lot of movies, and I absolutely was not seeing horror movies. I did not. I think at this point in my life, I had seen 15 minutes of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, and that was like enough for me to almost just kind of vow off the entire horror genre. Like I was not a fan of horror movies, and so him just telling me a movie was called Sinister, obviously your brain's turning, and I'm like, okay, this is a horror movie. I don't want to go. I'm not gonna like this. And I kind of kept telling him multiple times. I was like, no, I'm not going. Like I'm not going to see a horror movie. But he kind of was just like, well, the tickets. He already bought the tickets. He was like, no, you're coming with me. So I went in to see with him and Sinister, and then a whole bunch of our whole friend group they all ended up buying tickets too, and so we all went like as this friend group to see this movie. And again, so this was the first like horror movie. I mean, probably the first horror movie that I'd ever really seen from start to finish. Definitely the first horror movie I ever saw in theaters. And I think it's probably one of the first like 2 or 3 R-rated movies that I'd ever seen, kind of from start to finish. So I remember this is one of those movie-going experiences that's just burned into my brain. Like I'll never forget this experience of just all my friends going and seeing this movie, me being just terrified and just scared this entire movie, and just loving it. Kind of watching this movie and not loving it as in some like, oh, I had so much fun watching this movie. I have more fun watching it now because I've watched more horror movies and I'm used to the genre, but enjoying it back then because it was one of those that I was so scared in the theater, and it was hitting all the right beats and it was scaring me and it was doing all this. And instead of like hating it, I found myself kind of that weird thing of like, I went into this expecting to be scared, I'm getting scared, and that's creating like a fulfilling movie going experience. Like I'm getting what was advertised, I'm getting what I was expecting, and like that's such a rewarding thing for a film to be to deliver that to you. So this movie is one of those that I loved all of like the horror, the scares, the tension. There's so many just well-crafted scenes. And so while we're talking about kind of like the horror, that aspect of it, kind of mostly the scares, kind of the jump scares of this movie, I think it is something that is again worth pointing out, that I do think a lot of these, now that I've seen this movie 10 plus times in my life, over the years, each time I watch it, it is more and more increasingly obvious to me that the film is, especially with the scares, it is formulaic. It is like it is there. It's predictable. The way it's set up. I mean, the first scare or one of the first scares of the movie is kind of the simple idea of the fake out scare. It's usually like the first scare of a horror movie where it's you're setting the scene, you're starting to craft the tension, and the characters hears a noise and he's walking around, and all of a sudden he opens the laundry room and it's just his daughter, and it's like, oh, okay, we can all take a sigh of relief. And it's kind of like a formulaic thing that horror movies do to kind of like almost warm you up to the idea of being tense, but it doesn't necessarily deliver the knockout that early in the film because it wants to just start to build up the suspense, build up the tension, so then when they do start paying off on the jump scares later in the film, it kind of, it works a little better, it pays off a little bit better. So I do think that, in hindsight, looking at it now, it is kind of formulaic in the way that some of these scares are produced and the way that they are set up. But again, mind you, this is the first horror movie that I ever saw, so it was, to me, it was so fresh and it was so new. So it is one of those things where that's one area where I can see why I love this so much more than some people might, because it worked better for me than I think it might have for other people. And the next thing I want to talk about is kind of a similar thing in the sense of it was a first for me that obviously most people, when they see this for the first time, it's not a first for them. And it was getting to experience Ethan Hawke, like as an actor. I really should have looked this up and just confirmed before, but I was thinking about this when I was kind of watching the movie and kind of typing my notes and kind of, having this all fresh on my brain, and I was thinking, this I think is the first Ethan Hawke movie I ever saw. Obviously not the earliest, back, especially now with I've just done my Richard Linklater. Watching all of those. There's like eight Ethan Hawke and Richard Linklater films that are previous to this in terms of like the release year. But just in terms of from when I saw this, I don't think I had ever seen a Ethan Hawke performance before this, and so I remember just watching this being absolutely blown away by Ethan Hawke. All the acting in this film, I think, is serviceable. I think it's one of those things where, I mean, if you just remove Ethan Hawke, you don't talk about him, you talk about his family, you talk about James Ransom as Deputy So-and-so coming in, everyone is serviceable and they all do their part. And I think that's the type of acting that we have here. Obviously, you have the two children in the family that it's not like that's some stellar acting, but what they do is they provide the right level of creepiness, and they bring their performance adds to the atmosphere and adds to what Scott Derrickson and what the crew here, what they were trying to craft. Obviously, then you've got his wife, who the same thing. She's clearly is a great actress. I don't. Juliet Rylance was her name, I believe. I don't know. I should have looked that up as well. What have I seen anything else that she's been in? Because I'm not sure. But obviously, she's a very talented actress and is good at what she's doing. But for the most part, she has very few scenes where what she does is she just kind of brings kind of the familial presence to the scene. She is the one that is like kind of gives you the grounded, what you're kind of, what's at stake really for what Ethan Hawke's character's doing. You understand this is the consequences. This is what he's putting at risk as he's pursuing this book and pursuing this story. So she does a great job of just kind of grounding the story bit, but then she also has an amazing scene, the kind of the fight scene between her and Ethan Hawke where they're arguing and they're yelling, and it's just truly just a stunning, I remember watching that in the theater and being like, in a movie where I'm so scared of like a demon and I'm so scared of like the demonic presence and the what's going on here, this acting, this argument is so grounded and rooted in like real life. This is like something you would fight over. This is a big deal that's going on here, and all of a sudden just a phenomenal scene that had me just as uncomfortable as a lot of the scares in the film.
How about that? Would that be okay?
I can give
Oh,
all that
yeah,
to you.
yeah,
I can just when I finish the book.
This book isn't for us.
Yes,
It's for you.
Tracy, don't say
Only
that.
you.
Don't say that. That's not true.
It is true. There are plenty of other ways you can provide for this family.
Doing what? Teaching? Editing journalism textbooks? Don't you understand that writing is what gives my life meaning?
But then going back, obviously, to Ethan Hawke, he is the star of the film in terms of just, I mean, really just the film is him, but in terms of just the acting standout, because he is on screen probably 90, maybe not 90, but 85% or so of the film. Like he is he is the main character, and it's a story that everything is kind of going through him. We're either watching him or we're experiencing the things as he's experiencing them. Whether it's him watching the tapes, or talking to Deputy So and So, or to Vincent D'Onofrio's character, who has a little small uncredited part, but kind of him just reacting with him. So everything we're experiencing is like what Ethan Hawke's character is experiencing. So there's so much on his plate that he has to portray to get you to feel invested in not just this character, but just the entire story and the process of what's happening here, that I think he just does a phenomenal job of getting you to care about him, but also making you realize like this is a flawed person. This is someone who is doing things, and is he doing it for the right reason? His whole the kind of the mental, or the not philosophical, but just kind of the dilemma he faces of, he needs to get another bestseller, but why does he feel that need? Why does he feel the need? Is it because he needs the money, he wants the fame, he doesn't want to be viewed as a failure, he's just chasing his glory days? There's so many things that he's kind of struggling with, and so he makes these decisions that at times, you as a viewer, you're watching this and being like, oh no, like don't do that, like that's not a good decision. But at the same time, you also watch it and you're like, but I get why you're doing it. I understand your motivation. I understand what you're doing here. And so it's a complex character that he brings so much to it. And he is a phenomenal actor. And so I think whenever you get great actors and you put them in horror films, that's how they can typically kind of elevate the genre a little bit, because the horror genre in particular does have a history of these kind of lower, I don't want to say like all lower budget, but some lower budget horrors, or sort of just kind of like cheap horror films that aren't necessarily, not a whole lot of care was put into them. Sometimes the acting is a big like detriment to what's going on in the story. So when you get like a phenomenal actor just acting his ass off in this film as kind of the lead here, it makes it such a captivating and such a you're just so invested and you're hooked onto what's happening when he's on screen, which for this film is the majority of the time. So this was just a film that, when I saw this, I just fell in love with Ethan Hawke as an actor, and just fell in love with just what he was going to do. I just became a fan of what Ethan Hawke was going to do next. And I think it's crazy in hindsight, looking back at this is another thing I should have looked up. I think the second thing I ever saw Ethan Hawke in was The Purge. So really, for me, the first two things I ever saw of Ethan Hawke was like, in my head I was like, oh, Ethan Hawke's a horror actor, like that's what he does. But then obviously all these years later, I don't know if I've seen another horror film with him, so it's really kind of this cool experience of just discovering him as an actor, whether it be in the Before trilogy, anything Richard Linklater, First Reformed. There's so many different things that with Ethan Hawke that I've seen. Training Day. You'll get to see how just incredible of an actor he is, and then see that he was able to bring that to this type of horror film. I think for me, that's just one of the things that really elevated the film for me. And then the next thing that we're talking about here is, for me, I think it's the most memorable part of the film, outside of, I guess, kind of like the scares or some of the characters, and that is the score. This is one of those films that I give a lot of films credit for their scores, mostly because of the usually what it is it's because it's a piece of background music. It's something that's just kind of sweet or sentimental that adds to the emotion, and kind of it builds up the scenes when it's there. So you're watching this and you're hearing this beautiful piece of music, and it's creating these full encapsulating scenes. Sinister is the reason the score is so memorable. Is it is just haunted. It is a creepy score that every time I hear it, it just makes me uncomfortable. Like, no matter how many times I've seen the film, anytime the score just starts playing, especially when he's watching the Super 8 film of the murders that he's watching, the score just puts you in such an uncomfortable spot. It puts you in such a weird atmosphere that, again, it is uncomfortable. It is, if you haven't heard the score for this film, I'll put a couple links in the description of this video where you can go and listen to some pieces of music from this, because it's even without seeing what's happening, it is just haunted. And there's one particular piece that I'm sure I played it already in this video, at least a couple seconds of it, but it is one of those that it's playing during like the Super 8 videos that he's watching, and you'll know the one, and it's one of those that I just hear the music, and it's one that I hear in my head. You'll just hear it, like I'll just be moving on, and then just hear the like I'll just hear bits of like that score in my head, and it instantly puts the scene in my head. I know exactly what scene in the film is happening during this, and it's the piece of music, to be able to compose this music and to really just have it, just not only just have the music burned into your head, but the visuals that are accompanying the music permanently just burned into my head, is what makes it so creepy. And I just realized I forgot to say his name. Christopher Young is the composer of this music. It is just totally creepy. It is so effective, and it's kind of the same with another classic horror film of like Insidious. Like if you think of Tiptoe Through the Tulips, like it's one of those songs that's like, if you've seen the film, or or if I think it plays in the trailer too, but it's like, if you just know that music, it puts you in, like, you are just hearing that, you're thinking of Insidious. Like, it is so creepy and just puts you right into that space, and kind of that uncomfortable feeling of like you're watching that horror movie. That's what it is with these pieces of music, just linking you to Sinister. And so it is just completely unnerving. It makes me uneasy to like hear about it, and somehow I love it for that reason. So it is, again, it's just a super phenomenal. Have to give us a big shout out to Christopher Young again for his score. And then kind of in the same vein, I also want to give a shout out to the sound design of this film. So much of this film is, again, just, it's a horror film that's, like I said, kind of based on some predictable, I guess I don't want to say predictable, but kind of formulaic or set up in a certain way type of jump scares. And one of the biggest ways that you set that up is, again, with the sound design, to have creaking floorboards, or to have something kind of happening in the background, or behind you, and Ethan Hawke, or your character, has to turn around and quickly try and figure out what that sound was. And so it's these scares that are kind of set up in a certain way to get you to the big scare. And then obviously, if you're going to have jump scares in your movie, the biggest thing is, like, if you're going with the traditional jump scare tactic or the jump scare formula, you have to have that blaring, that loud noise as the scare happens, to get your audience to have that jolt of, not only are you scared because of a visual that just popped up on screen out of nowhere, but you're scared because of just this blaring loud sound that just hits you at the same time. And so Sinister does that. It has those formulaic jump scares kind of queued up to a T. There's some horror films that I've seen where they set up these jump scares and then they don't execute the jump scare, whether that be maybe the visual isn't necessarily scary, or it is just like they don't necessarily get the audio right. It's not like, it doesn't give you that extra jolt because you're just hearing a loud blaring sound in your ear. And so it's kind of one of those things that I can understand in a lot of films, and I'm not the biggest jump scare fan in general, but for this particular film, because it's one of those that, again, the first horror movie I saw, this was all so new to me, getting those jump scares kind of executed the way that they did get them, with not with just the sound design in those scenes, I think is incredible. And just the sound design in general, so many of these scenes take place at night, and so you have so many different, you kind of have to set the scene with the sound, whether it being a quiet scene, and then that's why you're hearing something in the background, or just, I mean, speaking of the sound design, just hearing the sound of the Super 8 playing, and just clicking through as it's playing the videos. There's so much just with the sound design that I think really is what helps add to the tension and to the scares of this film. Now, I didn't mention it at the beginning of this video, but I am going to do a very, very brief spoiler here. And this isn't even necessarily a spoiler that's like gonna spoil anything about the film in particular if you haven't seen the film and you want to see it, but it's just a spoiler for kind of, I guess, how the film ends. So I guess in my head it is a big enough of a spoiler. So if you do just want to skip, if you want to look at the timestamps at the bottom, you'll see where this little mini spoiler section ends. But there is just one quick little thing about how the film ends that I want to talk about. And so the spoiler here that I want to talk about, that I think was a reason why this film was so memorable to me, and why worked, I think, so well for me is the idea of evil winning. It was it was something that I remember having this conversation with my parents when I was a really little kid. And, like, I can't remember what movie they were watching, but they were watching some. I want to say it was kind of like a war movie. It was, something kind of this big epic kind of battle thing, and it was, I don't think it was Lord of the Rings, but it could be something kind of like along those lines of maybe what they were watching when I was a little kid. And I remember kind of having this thought, because it's, you're watching these two sides fight, and I was thinking, what happens if you watch a movie and the good guys lose? Like, what is it like? What would that be like? What would that be? Because at this point in my life, I'm talking, like, I was really young when I had this. So this is like an 8, 9, 10 year old having these thoughts. I've never seen a movie where it's like the good guys don't win, and so I had this kind of this idea, this thought. And I remember asking them, like, would they ever make a movie where, like, the bad guy, or the bad guys win, like the good guys lose? Like, what would that type of movie be like? And I remember my parents kind of like answering it in the sense of, like, yeah, there are some movies where like, it doesn't end the way you think it's going to. Maybe the characters don't get the type of redemption or the type of victory that you think they're going to get, but they still alluded to it in a sense of, like, but usually movies end on a happy note. Because again, I'm a little kid, so they're probably trying to sugarcoat this, but usually movies end on a happy note, or they end with your protagonist conquering whatever it is that they're doing. But that was always just a thought to me that I was like, in my head I was like, but that doesn't have to happen. Like, it could still be a complete movie, or it could still be this, this good experience, and then it would be so shocking if you get to the end and evil wins. And that's exactly what this is in Sinister. I remember watching this film, and again, at this point in my life, I'm in high school now, but I still just hadn't seen that many movies, so I'm not sure if I had ever seen a movie where the good guys don't win. It's kind of a basic way of, obviously not every movie is like a action movie like that, or a war battle movie, but usually whatever the protagonists are trying to do, they come up victorious and they conquer whatever they're doing, whatever the challenge is, and then it ends on a happy note. And so I remember watching this movie, and there is a moment, I guess, we're in the spoilers, I'm okay saying this now, when they move away from the house. And I hadn't pieced it together yet. In hindsight, looking back at it now, it's pretty obvious that the houses are connected, that once you move, like, that's when, because obviously they all live together, so obviously you can tell, like, or they lived in the same houses, not together, but they lived in the same houses, so you can tell that, like, something is happening when these people move out of these houses. I didn't necessarily piece that together, but that was still the moment for me in the film, because you're approaching the end of the movie at that point. There's maybe 15-20 minutes left at that point when they move. And I remember sitting in the theater, being so uncomfortable, being so, like, tense and scared, and the thought crossed my head again of, how are they going to get out of this? Like, how do Ethan Hawke is barely even at this point discovering what Bagul is, like the demon that's eating children and killing families, and, like, he's barely discovering, like, who this character is. And I was thinking, you barely know who it is. How are you going to defeat this? Like, and how do you defeat it? Like, what is the protocol for defeating this monster? And so in my head I'm thinking, there is no way they are getting out of this. And so I had that moment in the theater of, like, it hitting me of, like, I think I'm seeing it. I think I'm seeing a movie where the good guys are not going to win. This family is not going to get out of this. And having this kind of that thought prevailing over the last 20 minutes of the film, and then seeing that the way the film does play out, seeing the way that they do not win. The good guys do not win in this situation. And then just realizing and seeing that, being like, this answers this question that I've had for so long, and it pays off in such a thrilling and haunting and terrifying way, but it was satisfying. Like, it completes the story in a sense that you walk out of that theater and you don't necessarily feel great. You're not like, oh wow, like, I can't believe they did it, what a great end. But you walk out and you're like, yeah, that's what was going to happen. Like, you messed with this demon that has this Bagul who has a very kind of structured way of how he's doing things, and you walked kind of right into this whole play, this whole thing that he does. Obviously that's how this was going to end, and that's the story that this film told. It wasn't necessarily, the story of this author writing that book and kind of vindicating himself and coming back to the star, but it really is just, it's about the villain. It's about the villain, and this is how he does his attacks. This is how he gets these families in these situations, haunts them, and then messes with the family, messes with the kids, takes one of the kids, kills the family. Like the story follows this formula very well, and it is one of those you walk out of the theater and you're like, yeah, that's how that film was supposed to end. And I just remember being very satisfied and very like I just saw something so unique and so different from what I had seen to that point in my life that I truly just loved that ending. And this might be one of those, because I've talked about it multiple times on my channel, I love films that nail their endings. This might be one of the first films where that was really a thing, that one of the reasons it stuck with me, because I was watching that and was just like, yeah, like that is absolutely, like that is like such a critical part of storytelling, and for me something that I love so much when you nail that ending, and Sinister did. So then we're going to ask those two questions. Is this still a 5 out of 5 star film for me? And yes, this is. This is one of those that, I understand that there are some kind of maybe some flaws or some things. I can understand why someone might not like this as much as I do, but for me, because of the emotional connection and because of the experience that I had with this film, I will always love this film. This is a 5 out of 5 star film for me. The second question is, does this film have a chance, or is it going to enter into my Letterboxd 4? Does it have a shot of bumping one of these 4 films out? And unfortunately, Sinister, no, it's not. There is a very, like I just said, you can feel there is kind of a distinction here, right, between these 4 that are in there and where Sinister is. I understand it's not on the same tier. It's not like, I don't love it that much that it has the opportunity to bump one of those 4 films out, but it is still one of those films for me that I wanted to make a video about it, wanted to talk about it, because of that connection and that experience that I have with this film, because I love it so much. It does deserve a spot in this series, but yeah, it is still a very clear difference, and it doesn't have the juice to really crack into that Letterboxd 4. There is kind of a tier, there is a difference here between these films. So I love it, but no, it's not going to make the Letterboxd 4. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know down below in the comments below if you have seen Sinister, if you like this film, if you're, someone like me that has just such a interesting connection to the film to where there's a reason why you maybe love it more than maybe you should, or just let me know if there's any films that you kind of relate like that to. If there's any films that you think you love more than the general consensus, and it's because of whatever experience that you have with the film. That's just, I think, that's such an interesting concept, and a way of, that's how you get these people that, a generally disliked movie, someone may really love it, and it's because of that, again, because of that connection they have to the film. I think that's a really fun thing that you could experience with film in general. So let me know if there's anything like that in the comments, or just let me know in the comments as well just what some of your favorite horror movies of all time are. This is one of those for me because it's the first horror movie I ever saw. It'll always have that spot. If I did a Letterboxd 4 of just my 4 favorite horror movies, I think it would have a spot in there. But at the same time, I don't know if Sinister is, at this point, I've seen so many great horror movies since, so I don't know, maybe it's not in that Letterboxd 4 either. But just kind of fun idea, fun thought to have. Just let me know what other horror movies you like in the comments below. And again, thank you so much for watching this video. If you would like to like the video and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate it. Have a great day.